Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on our 5th episode tonight of Alpine Stories, and thank you for being patient. As you may have gathered, because we're usually pretty prompt, we are having some technical issues, and our technical issue tonight is that our speaker can't get on. So we were just a few minutes late while we're sorting that out. We're still waiting for Kath to join us, but we didn't want to leave you guys hanging around in the cold in the green room waiting for us, so we just thought we'd open channels and let you know what's going on. We are frantically, well, I'm not frantically scrambling behind the scenes, but poor Lizzie is it's her birthday today and she's frantically speaking to Kath on the phone to find out if we can resolve the issue and get Kath with us. So I would suggest maybe just hanging on a few more minutes and waiting. If you guys in the meantime could just put in the chat where you're calling in from tonight, that's really super useful for us, and it's really nice to just hear where people are from and where they're logging in from. Tonight I am in Norway and I'm sat above the fjords in Romsdalen, and it's a beautiful evening, and the fjord's super flat and calm, and it's a lovely view. So yeah, let us know where you all are, and if you're well, that'd be fab. And usually this is the bit where I do a bit of spiel about Women's Alpine Adventure Club, but you've probably heard lots about us by now. But just to say that today would be, this time last year was our very first ever summer meet that we had in the Écrin National Park in France. And that was our first in-person meet to bring everybody together and to practice alpinism, our alpine skills. People were learning to prussic up loo blocks, very glamorous, learning to put crampons on, and then succeeding on their first kind of big 3,000 meter peaks. So that was fantastic. That's what we were doing this time last year. I'm in Norway because I came for our first winter meet this winter in Hemsedal, and there we were ice climbing and ski touring and having avalanche workshops and cross-country skiing, and I liked it so much I stayed a bit longer than I should have done, and then kind of got happily locked down here in Norway. And now the world's opened up again, I'm not ready to leave. So that's what we do. We've also got, as you guys know, we're running these talks while we can't meet in person. We were due to have lots of skill sharing in the UK that we can't now do, so we've replaced that with some talks here. And also on our website, we've got things like people's favourite alpine routes, so if you want to go and check those out, we've got bios from all the different guides that we're in touch with and that have spoken on the programme. So we've got some really interesting stuff about top tips from them, and of course all the past talks. So we've heard about camels carrying skis, we've heard about muskox facing off helicopters, we've heard all sorts in this brief series so far. So if you've missed any, then do go and catch up. And that's about it, really. That's all I've got to say about us. And then in terms of our Zoom etiquette, you guys already know loads about that. I'm sure we're not the only online show that you guys visit. But just to say, we've muted all your mics and your videos, and that's not because we're antisocial and we don't want to see your faces and hear from you. It's just that when the speakers are talking, it can be quite distracting for them if videos are coming on and off and all those sorts of things. So what we're doing is we just have a Q&A at the end, and Jenny will tell you all about how you can raise your hands and which channels you can use for answering for asking questions. But we usually have plenty of time at the end, and any questions that don't get answered, please post them in the chat, because we do then put them on the website and update them afterwards. So that's how it rolls. And I'm hoping desperately that I've filled enough time now for Kath. Jenny's nodding at me, and I don't know if that's a good way. But this is the point where I usually hand over to Jenny and she introduces the speaker, so fingers crossed.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, I believe Kath is with us, so really sorry about all of that. We've done pretty well so far, I think. So that's all good. So yeah, we're thrilled to have Kath James with us tonight. Kath is a winter mountaineering and climbing instructor, as well as an international mountain leader. She's a senior instructor at Plaza Brennan here in North Wales, and she has a wealth of experience from kind of learning alpine climbing the hard way, as in you'll hear about just going and doing it, and she's going to tell us about all the lessons she's learned. So Kath, if you're there, if you're able to turn on your mic and video, hopefully, hooray!
Hello.
Made it. Oh, nice stressful start anyway. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're really looking forward to learning all that we can from your talk. So yeah, over to you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, that was a bit stressful. It was like climbing the crux on some loose chossy route. Anyway, yeah, so I'm Kath, and I'm going to talk a bit about my alpine climbing career and some of the lessons I learnt, and also perhaps a slightly different way that you might prefer to do it if you're going to start out in the Alps yourself and not make the same mistakes, and probably have a more rapid career development as well in terms of your alpine climbing. So as a teenager, I did loads of walking on Dartmoor, camping, a bit of climbing, went to university in Aberystwyth and did loads more climbing. And then I, at the end of the 3 years studying geography, a friend and I decided to go to the Alps. And Ian had done a little bit of climbing in the Southern Alps in New Zealand, and a bit of climbing where he grew up in the Lake District. But that was kind of the extent of our experience between us. I'd not put crampons or crampons on or used an ice axe before, but that was okay, I think. So we got the bus from Aberystwyth to Chamonix, which was a bit of an adventure in itself, and then arrived in Chamonix, and we pretty much straight away got the lift up to the Col du Midi. We'd done a bit of research before we headed out there, and we'd been up in Llanberis in outside as it was at the time, looking for guidebooks, and there was this sort of old rock climber, well, we thought he was quite old, called Al Leary, who recommended these routes that we should go and do. So we were armed with this little guidebook that he sold us, and yeah, so we went straight up to the Col du Midi. We were a bit intimidated when we saw the massive sign that said no camping, but we went anyway, got up there and set up our tent, and then we headed down. So this is our tent set up, me just at the the exit off the Midi station. Both pretty gripped, I think, when we saw the steep drop down to Chamonix, but we managed to safely get down onto the col. And then the next morning we got up and we went to climb the east ridge of the Pyramide de Tackle. Needless to say, we weren't the fastest, but we got up it and we got back down, and that was really good. So we had another night camping, and then we did the Cosmiques Arête. And again, like, this is a mixed climb, and again, it all sort of went to plan. We had a nice time, and that was great. And then we decided that we wanted to do this route called the Swiss route on the Grand Cap. And we thought it was achievable because we could climb that grade back in Wales on short cliffs. So we headed down there, and actually both of us started to feel really ill, and realised that we weren't really going to be successful on this route. So we plodded back to our tents. I think we built a snowman, chilled out for the rest of the day, and thought the next day we'll go up Mont Blanc de Tackle. And a similar thing happened. We got about halfway up and were both like destroyed from the altitude, really, but we didn't really understand that. Bailed back down, packed up the tent, and then headed back down to Chamonix and just went cragging for the rest of the trip. Now, I then moved to North Wales to become a centre assistant at Plas y Brenin, and I found out a little bit more about Al, that actually he's not an alpinist. He's just an incredibly enthusiastic, really lovely bloke who loves esoteric rock climbing in North Wales and sports climbing in Europe. So it's interesting that we took his beta on good routes to climb in the Alps, and had a small amount of success. So I spent the summer in North Wales climbing, which was great. And Ian and I hatched another plan. He was up in Ambleside doing the outdoor course there, and we hatched a plan at Christmas to go to Cognac to go ice climbing. And we got a flight out to Milan. We decided we were going to camp, and got to Cognac, and then did a route. So that's Ian on the right. On the first route we did, which was 2 pitches, and that was all successful. It was New Year's Eve that day, and we headed out for a few drinks. Not sure what time we got back to the tent, but needless to say, we didn't get up that early the next morning, and we didn't realise we'd lost our head torches. So the route we were going to do the next day was much longer. We got to the top as it got dark, or as it was going dark, and we didn't read the guidebook properly. We didn't understand that it talked about abseiling off, so we started walking down, and I slipped and ended up with a broken ankle. Ian chucked a rope down to me so I could climb back up to him, and then we abseiled down the rest of the way through the trees. We then went back to the tent and went to sleep. Next morning, we got up and we decided that our exit strategy was going to be to go and see a friend of mine who was living in Chamonix, working at the youth hostel. So we went to see Kirsty. When we got to the bus stop to work our way back to get down to Aosta and then Courmayeur and then through the tunnel, we found our head torches in plant pots. So we didn't lose them, which was a bit of a bonus. This is just a shame we didn't have them the night before. Anyway, got to Chamonix, went to hospital, and then got repatriated back to the UK. So that was all a bit exciting, rather nerve-wracking, rather a close call, and a lot of lessons learned about getting up early, making sure you've got the right equipment, and making sure you know what you need to do to have a safe descent. That sort of winter, I went to Scotland after my ankle had recovered. So, 6 weeks was sort of mid-February, and by the first few weeks in March, I went to Scotland and did a little bit of winter climbing there. And that sort of allowed me to maybe start out where I should have started out, with crampons and ice axes. And then I spent the rest of the summer climbing in North Wales, lots. And Ian and I hatched our next plan based on the fact that I was surrounded by loads of people who went climbing lots, and lots of instructors at the Brennan who went alpine climbing lots. So I got a little bit obsessed with the Cassin route on the Piz Badil after hearing some stories and seeing some pictures. So we headed out in June. I never asked the question, what time of year would you climb the Cassin route? We headed out in June, and again, it was like a public transport journey to get to Bondo. We had massive bags. We went up and we climbed the Pisgamelli Flatiron Ridge, and that was all successful. But it became really clear that we weren't going to climb the Cassin route because it was too covered in snow. So, accepting of that, we had some routes on our agenda that were in Chamonix. So we headed to Chamonix. I think it was like a bus and a train, and then a bus, and sleeping in the bus station in Courmayeur over here on the right, making dinner, I think. And then we thought we'd get on the Drew. So again, we selected this route because we could climb the grade that it said it was in the guidebook. But we'd failed to recognise that, just like the Cassin route on the Badil, this route is a rock climb, and it was covered in a lot of snow. So we didn't make a huge amount of progress up. I think we got just above here somewhere. And then the clouds started coming in, and we decided to bail off back down, which was probably the best decision because it then got quite snowy that afternoon. So we had our tail between our legs there, but it was all okay. We had a few days in the valley, and then we thought, oh, this Frendo Spur's a mixed route, so maybe that's a goer. Not realising again that the bottom half of it is like really nice rock climbing, and the top half is some snow and ice climbing. So we got on this. Progress was really slow. We climbed a lot with axes and crampons in the places that we should have just been rock climbing, and bivvied way below where we should have. Next morning, started climbing. We had like the main crux of the rock climbing to do, and Ian wasn't very well. So I was sort of climbing up, and I realised that there wasn't much rope coming through, and had to then go back down to see what was going on. So abseiled off. We then down to him. We then made the decision to start abseiling down the route and retreat, and the ropes got stuck, and the end of the rope, one end of the rope was too far up. Neither of us wanted to then prusik up the rope, not having both ends of the rope. So we pulled as much as we could down, cut the rope, and then made the decision to call for a helicopter, which arrived and plucked us off rather skillfully, and got us back down to the valley. So when I arrived back, having broken my ankle when I was a centre assistant, I wasn't really that keen to share that I'd also had a helicopter rescue off the Frendo Spur. So sort of kept a bit quiet about that and reflected on it rather a lot over the next few months. I was then planning to go to Yosemite with a load of guys that I had been a CA with, but just before that, the opportunity came up to go to the Alps for a week. So I went with my friend Andrew Sutty, who was a centre assistant the year after me, and we tried the Drew again. So it was in perfect conditions. It was dry. The rock was not covered in snow. Unfortunately, we both suffered with stomach issues at the bivvy that night. So we just decided to sack it off. But we went and climbed something called the Cordia Pillar, which was really cool, on the Grand Chamonix. And we went and climbed some routes on the south face of the Midi. And what became apparent to me then was that if I was climbing pure rock routes in the Alps with straightforward glacial approaches, I could be successful as long as they were in the right condition for the type of climbing that was required. So I was starting to get a better understanding, I think. So then it was out to Yosemite, and this was a brilliant trip. And actually I do my 8 o'clock lecture at the Brennan when we have to do them on this trip and climbing the north face of the Eiger and making a few comparisons between them. But this trip was really good for teaching me about being able to last quite a few days on a route, having to work hard. Like climbing is physically hard work. The hauling's really, really strenuous. The actual climbing, placing gear, pulling on it, stepping up, going around roofs, all that sort of thing is strenuous and hard work, but it's also about systems. So I got much better at being good at systems and problem solving and sorting stuff out. So we climbed the south face of Washington Column, the west face of Leaning Tower, and then we got on the nose. And by the time we got on the nose, we were pretty efficient, and it all felt pretty smooth and like we were a good team. So the guy that I was climbing with there is a guy called Gaz Davis, who now runs the Arrête Centre in Llanwig. So that was a really cool adventure. And at the end of the trip, we did a load of sort of big multi-pitch trad routes as well. Probably the best trad route we did was doing a route on Royal Arches called Royal Arches, and then continuing higher up onto something called Crest Jewel. And then we had like hours of walk back down to the valley, but it was a pretty good mega day out. So loads of lessons learned. And that winter I went to Scotland and really got sort of stuck in with winter climbing. The photo on the right here is South Post Direct on Craigmeggy. I think I did 0.5 that winter, Combe Gully, things like that. Lots of classics, quite a lot of ice climbing, a little bit of mixed climbing. And I actually lived with Hannah Burrows-Smith for a few weeks, and we hatched a plan to go climbing in the Alps together, which was brilliant because suddenly I was going climbing with a much more experienced alpinist rather than an equal. And then through the summer before I headed out, just did as much rock climbing as I possibly could to get as strong as possible. So this picture on the left is in Pembroke. So Hannah and I did a few acclimatization routes. We did some stuff in Switzerland, some just general peak bagging to get acclimatized. We also tried to traverse the Drew, but we were a little bit slow and got up the Grand Drew and then came back down. And then we decided to go to the Ekran to do this South Pillar on the Bard Ekran, which isn't a route I'd recommend. It's really loose and pretty unpleasant, but it was a really good experience. So we walked in one morning, we climbed up to this bivvy ledge. We went sort of super light and just took bivvy bags and down jackets. So it was a pretty cold night. We had some experience of blocks getting pulled off, and it was quite slow climbing because of the nature of the rock. So the next day we continued on to the top, and it was sunset by the time we were coming down the normal route on the other side. So got a nice sort of sunset picture there. We arrived at the hut on the other side really late. We weren't allowed any space there, so we had a second cold bivvy without any food, and then the next morning got up and walked out. And we actually then walked down to drive to Milan to pick up Andrew Sutty, who had climbed with on the Cordia Pillar, and we did a load of good rock climbing. And then, which is the next picture actually. And then we met up with Gaz Davis and did a load of routes. So we did some good rock routes, some TD rock routes, which were good because they were within my rock climbing grade. And then we did a bit of easier general mountaineering. So this is the top of the North Ridge of the Weissnies. And this is Andrew and I walking in to do the Vinci route, which is a south ridge on the Piz Cengalo, which goes up this really cool spiky arête, and then you just abseil back down. So in all, it was a really successful trip, and I definitely learned a lot from spending some time with a more experienced alpinist. That really made a difference, I think. So following summer, Andrew, Gaz and I went out to the Alps, and we did some warm-up routes, and then we were successful on the Frendo Spur. I think we did the north face of the Tour Ronde, which is a sort of AD north face. So we were sort of checking out conditions on big snowy faces, and then did the Frendo, and we got the lift up mid-morning, climbed until we got to the bivvy ledge, which was before it got dark, and then the next day got up early, topped out, and then lift back down before lunchtime, I think. So it felt really smooth, and like we'd really accomplished something, and I definitely felt like I was starting to understand what I needed to do to be an alpinist. A bit later that year, I had another trip with Gaz, and I just didn't want to not include this picture because I think it's like one of the most beautiful pictures and one of the most beautiful ridges in the Alps that I've done. The whole ascent was really straightforward. We walked into the bivvy, had a good night's sleep, got up early, and did the route. So there's not a story behind it, but it was a great route, and it's a really beautiful place to go, something to aspire to do, I think, for any budding alpinist. So the next few years, I ticked off a load of general sort of mountaineering type routes, and this is the Biancagrat on the Piz Bernina. So this was really cool. You go into a hut. You next morning get up, you traverse a really cool rocky scramble, and then you get to this really cool ice crest. And I climbed this route with a colleague. Well, she was my boss when I worked at the Kent Centre, Anne Vowles, and she'd done loads of alpine climbing when she was younger, but hadn't done much for a few years. And we just had a great time ticking off various routes in the Bernina, in the Swiss Alps, and sort of dodging around, avoiding the weather, getting lots of AD type of routes done, which was really fun. And then at the end of that trip, Anne headed home, and I stayed out to climb with Matt Steigel and two of his mates, Reese and Tom. And we decided that we'd team up as a group of 4, and we'd have a go at traversing the Chamonix Aiguille, which starts at the Col de Midi and finishes at the Spencer Couloir before you go over the Grand Chamonix. So we thought it'd be good as a 4 because there's one abseil off the Dent de Cayman that requires a 60-metre abseil, so we could tie our ropes together and abseil down. So it all started off really well. Midi plan traverse we'd all done before, that was really smooth. And then we got into some really cool sort of rock climbing, and there's lots of abseiling and traversing around corners and sort of rope trickery required. And then we got to this big abseil on the Cayman, and the rope got stuck. Now this was totally my fault, but it was a bit awkward at the time. So I just kept pulling the rope because I was just hoping the thing would eventually come free. And all that happened was it just got to the point that the rope was then out of reach. So our solution was that I stood on Reese's shoulders, Matt tied all the ice axes we had together, and that meant that I could pull the rope across by sort of flicking the ice axe across the rope, and then I tied a little knot in, got a prusik on it, and then Reese actually then volunteered to prusik up the rope and retrieve it. And it took a long time to do that. It was quite precarious, me being on Reese's shoulders, and it was quite a narrow bresh that we were stood on when this was happening. So we then decided to bivvy, and it was quite an eventful bivvy. I can remember being awake in the night, like Matt and I looking at each other going, hope that thunderstorm that's right over the Grand Duras right now doesn't come too far this way. Unfortunately, it didn't. And the next morning we got up, continued along. We had a few snow showers at the end of the day, and I think we got back down into Chamonix at 9 in the evening, went to the famous Midnight Express for a steak-frite fromage baguette, and that didn't really satisfy our hunger. We then went for pizza, but we were all pretty chuffed with actually getting along this route and having a really cool adventure. And it's quite a funky place to go, and to go do all of those peaks in a one was really good. So this particular year was like a bumper year for my alpine climbing, because I then got to do the north face of the Eiger, so 1938 route, and it was a bit sad in some ways because I was meant to climb with Gaz, but he dislocated his knee climbing on the Grocken like 3 days before we were due to fly out. So I was frantically phoning around to see if anyone else was available, and Stu McDonald and Pete Rowlands were like, yeah, we're going climbing, and I actually happened to be on the same flight as Pete, so I went climbing with them. I was a bit nervous about this because I knew Pete was trying to get his last few routes in for the guide scheme, and I didn't want to be the reason why he didn't succeed at that. But when on the Friday evening, Stu sent a message to both of us saying, I've got food, I've got gas, we're going to Grindelwald. When I realised that Pete was shitting himself as much as me, I didn't feel so bad about maybe letting the side down. So both of us were really nervous on the flight out. Stu picked us up. He had this Winnebago style van at the time, and we drove to Grindelwald, sorted out our bags, and then got up early the next morning and got on the train. And I didn't realise until we actually got there how close the north face of the Eiger is to the train station. You just sort of like wander around a corner and there it is, and then you get on it. So that was pretty cool. It was a fairly uneventful ascent, really. We were really fortunate. It was in good conditions. So this picture on the left is me on the Hinterstoicer Traverse, which was covered in neve. And then lower down the route, we climbed just in our boots and with our hands, without gloves. And as we progressed up, we then needed to put crampons on because there was a lot of verglass, and then we needed to get axes and gloves on as we progressed. So the end of the Hinterstoicer is, there's a little crack that you climb up, and then you're in the Swallow's Nest bivvy. I think the one thing for all three of us that was really interesting was that when you read the guidebook description, it would say something like go right for climb rightwards, but you didn't really know how far. And we very quickly realised that actually we just sort of had to follow our noses, perhaps in the way that the first ascensionists would have, with a bit of extra information to them to work out where to go, because it's such a massive face. You can't get the level of detail out of the description. So Swallow's Nest bivvy was really nice. Next day, continued on up. So you go up a few ice fields, past the famous Death Bivouac, and then up something called the Ramp and the Brittle Crack. And then you get to this really cool bivvy ledge above the Brittle Crack. And I was surprised, like we sat in the sun that evening. It was beautiful, just watching the sun go down. It was quite warm, it was pleasant. And we got to sort of look, getting nervous about across the Traverse of the Gods, getting nervous about doing that the next morning. The next morning, went across the Traverse of the Gods. So that's this here. And then you get into the White Spider. There's a few other pitches above that, and then up onto the summit ridge. So the three of us didn't really have a clue that we were sat in a rather precarious looking position on the summit there, on the cornice. But we were all really pleased. We sent a few messages to say that we got up the Eiger, but of course we still had to get back down. And the route down comes down this snowfield and then down this limestone. And it's kind of like walking down a tiled roof. And we made the decision as there's nothing to attach ourselves to the mountain. We just climb down that solo because that seemed the safest thing to do, rather than tripping over a rope when it wasn't attached to anything. So we got down, we got to the train station that we'd got off a few days earlier, 3 days earlier, missed that train by 5 minutes, the last train of the day, which was a bit annoying. We're then elated when we saw the Coca-Cola machine, only to be totally gutted because we then realised we didn't have any Swiss francs. Spent 15 or 20 minutes just sitting there, and then finally got up and walked back down to Kleine Scheidegg and had a really lovely steak and chips and a few beers in a hotel there before getting the train down the next morning. Nice that we got a like sunset shot of the three of us before we went to eat and drink. And the next morning we couldn't see the face, it was totally shrouded in clouds, so it felt really fortunate. It was like the right people to climb with, amazing conditions, perfect weather, and everything sort of came together. All the stars aligned. So maybe that was the pinnacle of my alpine climbing career. I'm not sure. Maybe it's yet to come. But the next few routes are just routes that I've really enjoyed doing, or routes that I think are really aspirational. So did finally get up the Cassin route on the Badil, knowing that it needed to be climbed in the summer when it was snow-free. And that was a really amazing day out, and like really straightforward. One top tip I've got from this was when I was climbing with Anne in the Bernina, we met up with Matt and Reese and Tom, and they'd just climbed the Cassin route, and it seemed to take them longer to descend than it did to actually climb the route. And Anne was really puzzled by this. And Anne's has lady a few words really, but she said to me, I don't remember it taking so long to get down when I did that route many years ago. And her top tip was to lower the foot. She said, I remember we would lower the first person and the second person would abseil, and you're coming down a narrow ridge where you don't know which side of the ridge the belay bolts are for the abseils. So this is what we did, and it worked really well, because it meant if you went the wrong side of the ridge, you could just climb back up until you located the next stance, clip into it, next person abseiled, and that just seemed to work really well. And I remember thanking her afterwards, saying that was a brilliant top tip. But a lot of people descend down the other side and then walk back the next day. But you know, different options for different people, really. This is, so it's Gaz and Paul James, and we tried to have a bit of a trip. I think we really wanted to climb the Matterhorn, but realised that it wasn't in good condition. So we tried something called the Triftgrat on the north face of the Breithorn, and it was just too snowy. We were wading. So we bailed on that, and then we were just scratching around. It wasn't a super successful trip. It was really hard to find things that were possible to climb. We decided to go up to the top of the Climb Matterhorn, and we wanted to go out to a little bivvy hut on the glacier there. But when we got up there, it was sort of white out, and we were like, we can't really do this. You might walk in a white out in Scotland, but not where there's massive crevasses. So we opted to stay in the lift station. So we found some blankets to keep warm. And I think after a few hours of realizing that it was going to be pretty cold, the warmest place we could find was the toilets. So the three of us were in the toilets with these blankets until the next morning, trying to keep warm. And then got up and we did a lot of wading, but had a really nice time traversing the Breithorn, which is a really cool ridge to go and do. The pictures on the right are of our descent after trying to do the Triftgrat. So we had an old map, and it suggested we could just walk down the glacier and onto a footpath at the end. Anyway, it turned out that the glacier had retreated a lot, and we ended up employing all sorts of different rope tricks to get down steep, icy, black ice gullies and things to finally find a way back to Zermatt. Okay, so I've talked a lot about alpine climbing, but I really like going ski touring as well. And I think this is quite a key thing in some ways, because it taught me a lot of other stuff about being in the mountains, and it enabled me to be in the mountains at all times of year. So skiing's really good fun. I learned to ski as a centre assistant on Placid Brennan's ski slope, and then I had to teach people skiing. Then I was fortunate enough to work at Ogwen Cottage, and we took Birmingham kids skiing in the Alps. So I got to develop my skiing a bit by joining in with their ski lessons, and then eventually sort of started to venture out, skinning uphill and trying a bit of ski touring. And what I like about it is you can go as a larger group. It's quite social. You really get to know the hut systems in the Alps, because you're sort of forced to use them much more when you're ski touring in the winter. And you get to visit places that you wouldn't maybe choose to visit in the summer. So the picture on the left here is the Valseré hut on the Halt route, and it's just some nice skiing pictures. I think the top one's on the West Oberland tour. So I've been to more variety of places in the Alps, which has then highlighted other things I might like to climb that I wouldn't have otherwise known about. Brits don't seem to go to the Eastern Alps that much anymore, other than to go to the Dolomites. But there's peaks like the Königsspitz, which is this one on the left, which just looked amazing in the Ortler Alps. There's the Ortler, which has got an amazing looking north face. And it's the ski touring really that's identified these peaks to me. And I've been skiing with all sorts of different friends. I've had like girls trips skiing, trips with friends from other parts of the country who are into skiing and ski touring. And it's just a really nice social way to explore the mountains in the winter and spring. So I'm going to go back to sort of standard alpinism now and talk about this Crest of Hope on the Pis Mortaresh, slightly esoteric in the Bernina, 800 meters of AD plus maybe difficile minus climbing. And I climbed this with Lou Beetlestone. Lou last year tried to start climbing all the 4,000 meter peaks in the summer. But I think this was probably one of Lou's earlier alpine routes. And we had a great adventure walking into the hut. There was a load of army, like Swiss military guys, and they were going to go up Pis Mortaresh, and everyone was chatting about what they were going to do. And then we sort of went off on a different route in the morning when we got up. And this route was cool because it was lots of different stages along the way. So it's like rock climbing lower down, snowed up rock climbing, bit of walking on snow, and then onto a cool summit, and a relatively straightforward descent. When we got into the hut, these Swiss military guys just gave us a round of applause because they didn't expect that we would have gone and climbed that route. They thought we were going to do the PD that they all went up. So that was a bit of a shock. I think Lou and I were a bit embarrassed about that. And we weren't planning on staying in the hut, but ended up staying in the hut and having a nice evening with all those guys and then walking out the next morning. So that was a pretty cool adventure and yeah, really good fun. This East Ridge on the Weisshorn is an amazing route up a big 4,000 meter peak, and it was unsuccessful. So Gary Smith and I went out, we climbed loads around a roller, did various routes to acclimatise. This was something that was high on our tick list, and it probably wasn't really in the right condition. It was a bit too snowy. And the funniest thing about the attempt on this was Gary getting to the hut, realising he didn't have his sunglasses, and then walking back down for an hour to where we'd stopped to have a snack. His sunglasses weren't there, so he then walked back up to the hut and he took his hat off and his sunglasses were on his head. So there was a few moments of silence then when he realised that I'd been sat cooking dinner and relaxing whilst he'd done 2 hours extra of work. But his sunglasses were essential for the next day because we were going to spend a lot of time on a glacier where he would have wanted to protect his eyes. So that was a bit funny, but not funny for him, very funny for me. And the next day we were really strict with ourselves. We just set a time because we didn't want to end up trying to push on and have a total epic. So we set a cut-off time, and quite a short way up, really, we sort of realised that we were too slow in the conditions and had to bail back down. So it's something that's still on the list. I think I need to be there a bit later in the summer for it to be dry on the rock bits to achieve success on this one. Another classic route. So why did I want to do the Kateria Couloir? There's a saying that is something like, you're not a mountaineer until you stood on the summit of the Aiguille Verte. So I really wanted to become a mountaineer. And we went up to Grand Montet, bivvied there, got up and set off. It was really busy. There was a lot of sort of shoulder barging and pushing each other out of the way to try and stay on the nice neve and not be on the sort of blacker, harder, icier stuff at the bottom of the route. And in the end, Paul and I just decided we'll just let everyone else go past. And then we sort of had the route to ourselves after that. And it was really pleasant, good fun, amazing views on the summit. And then when you head down the Wimper Couloir, so this is notorious for avalanching because it gets the sun early in the morning, but this was in April, so it wasn't going to be too much of a problem. It was quite a cold conditions at the time as well. This is me in the Wimper Couloir looking across at the Grand Duras. And then the other picture, we then bivvied by the Covercle hut. The winter hut was open but full of skiers, and the main hut was shut. So we just found this sort of concrete outside the main hut, bivvied there. Next morning, had a really slow plod out. It would have been really cool to be on skis, but neither of us felt our skiing ability was good enough to do that. Lots of those people with skis who were climbing, they actually skied the Wimper Couloir. Neither of us would have been able to do that. And it felt like a lot of extra weight to carry to then like climb up and then abseil down with skis on our backs to then eventually get to a little bit of skiing. So even though walking out was hard work, maybe at the time with our level of skiing was probably the best option for us. Just the next few slides are just photos of routes that I think are really cool and really achievable, because it's sort of trainer alpinism, and I think this is a really good way to get into alpinism. So the South Ridge on the Salbichen is a difficile, and it's really nice climbing, and you walk. It's a really nice walk up to the hut. You then really nice, perfect granite rock climbing, really good gear, and a totally cool pinnacle summit to finish. And then the descent down, once you've abseiled off this pinnacle, it's a relatively straightforward sort of scramble and walk back down. And it just feels like an amazing alpine peak in a really cool place. But I guess you don't have to have that knowledge of how to behave on a glacier or anything like that. You don't have to carry crampons and ice axe and all that extra weight. You can be relatively lightweight with it and have a really pleasant time. And then this traverse of the finger spits, which is actually this peak over here. So you've got like the thumb and then all the fingers, is a really cool route in the Dolomites. I know some of you ladies in the Women's Alpine Adventure Club have been keen to get to the Dolomites. So this is something I think is really cool. It's the only route I've put in that's in the Dolomites, but perhaps it'll give you a bit of an idea of what the Dolomites look like and what they've got to offer. And this route's fun. It's quite accessible, but really adventurous. So you get this funny little 2-man bubble up to the col at the start, and then you just start rock climbing straight away, really. Do all the traversing. So it's a bit of abseiling, there's a bit of sideways climbing, there's a bit of down climbing, and then a bit of abseiling at the end to get into the other col, and then you just go down this massive ski slope all the way back down to the car, pretty much. And what I think is really cool about the Dolomites is it's got a big feel to it. And it sort of upskills you in terms of being conservative in your approach. It's all quite steep, some of it's quite loose, so it feels adventurous, but it doesn't feel as committing as going to some of the other, you know, the Valais or the Bernese Oberland or the Mont Blanc Massif, where everything feels massive and serious straight away. So I think the Dolomites are quite a cool place to go and do a bit more like trainer alpinism, and just get stuck into bigger routes if you're a rock climber. So I had a few years out to have a couple of children. So I had a bit of a break from going alpine climbing. And then this summer just gone, I went out to the Alps with Emma Warren, and she is married to Matt Steigel, who is a guide, and he works in the Alps a lot. And Emma often climbs with Matt. And she was really excited about this trip because she was like, oh, I'm getting to go climbing with someone who, we're just going climbing, we're climbing partners. So that was really cool. We did some trainer alpinism. We had 6 days, and I was desperate to cram in as much as possible, but the forecast wasn't amazing. So we drove down to the Écran and we did this Arête de Brie, which was a really cool route over a pinnacle, a limestone route. And we, you know, it was like walked in with light bags, trainers on, and that gave us an opportunity to get to know how each other worked and to fine tune our moving together skills and that sort of thing. And then we went to the Monteviso area. And we then did a route that was quite well bolted, that had some trickier pitches on it, which was really cool. And after that route, we then went to do Monteviso, the East Ridge. So we walked from one route to the other. We had a swim in a couple of lakes on the way to cool down because it was really, really hot. We then bivvied and we met up with Katrin and Di, who were just in that previous slide here. So Katrin and Di, 2 smiley ladies, total legends. And yeah, we had a really cool time, the 4 of us sort of working our way up this East Ridge. It's quite a big ridge, about 1,200 meters of grade 3 diff climbing, and brilliant to be on the top. And then a really involved descent that takes quite a long time. Little bit of down climbing, sort of weaving around different ways, following cairns, eventually getting to some via ferrata to get down through a col, and then a really long walk back down to the valley. So that was really cool. And I was really pleased to do something that took a long time. You know, it was like a big route that took a full day, and I found that quite satisfying to feel like, right, I'm back going alpine climbing again. So hopefully, probably not this summer, but hopefully in the near future, I'll get to do some more good alpine routes. Definitely got a big tick list of things I want to do. I guess in the meantime, can go rock climbing lots and keep ticking away at routes in Scotland. And also ticking away at teaching these little monkeys how to climb and ski. And I think my top tips for developing your alpine career is doing loads of climbing in the UK. Rather than going straight to the Alps, to go to Scotland in the winter and do some winter mountaineering and then some winter climbing, and just have a progressive approach to it. I definitely feel like I jumped in at the deep end, and I thought that I could do that because I could climb a certain grade, and I hadn't thought about the bigger picture. And I think the people I climbed with had a similar sort of mindset in that, well, we can climb this grade, so we should be able to do that. And we hadn't just weighed up the fact that this route's 800 meters, and the longest route that we've climbed in the UK was probably only 150 meters or something like that. And that had probably taken us most of the day. So be progressive with it. Go to Scotland. That makes you really hardy. You learn how to look after yourself well. You learn how to stop faffing, makes you more efficient. And then perhaps go to the Alps, do some alpinism that doesn't require loads of new skills. You don't need to learn about crevasse rescue and stuff like that, and then learn about crevasse rescue, and then start joining it all together with easier grade alpine routes and build up from there. If you're a bit younger, there are courses called Conville courses that are funded courses to teach you about becoming an alpinist. And so I'd really recommend applying for one of them if you're in the age bracket that allows that. I really wish that I'd done one of them, because I think I would have learned a hell of a lot from doing that. So yeah, that's my top tips based on my topsy-turvy journey through alpinism. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Kath. That was wonderful. Some really great photos and ideas there. And I think a lot of people who've done a little bit of alpinism might be kind of smiling along with some of those earlier mistakes that you made. I certainly was like, oh yes, guilty of that one. So now what we'd love to do is open up the floor to some questions, if that's all right. Aware of the time, because we're a bit late starting, so please just say, Kath, if you need to head off, if I assume like bedtimes have been taken care of. And
yeah, that's all sorted. Yeah.
Yeah, if you'd like to ask a question, you can pop one in the chat in the bottom bar there where we've been writing, or if you click on the participants button at the bottom, there's an option to raise your hand virtually, and then we can come over to you and you can ask your question to Kath face to face. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can write your question in the comments and we'll see them and ask them to Kath. So yeah, any questions, send them in. One thing I think like to talk about, Kath, is when you are scratching around for kind of not quite conditions and the weather's a bit not very good, what kind of things can we do about that? Where do you check the weather? How do you get hold of what conditions are in different valleys? Do you have any kind of top tips to kind of help people choose where to go if, for example, they've headed to Chamonix, which lots of British people tend to do, and it's not great there? What can people do?
I think so obviously getting local weather forecasts and get local mountain weather forecasts, and then lots of parts of the Alps have guides offices, and just to not be intimidated to go in and ask, because they'll be able to give you the most recent and up-to-date information. And you know, those first few trips, actually Ian and I went into the guides office and we looked at stuff, and we looked at what people had been doing recently. We obviously didn't really absorb fully that information. But yeah, just going and asking there, you're going to get reliable information. You're not going to get stitched up by that information. But Also, there's loads of forums. I think there's a Italian website called Camp to Camp where people log stuff they've done. So that can be really useful, but you just have to be aware that you don't know anything about the people that have written that up there. So they could have climbed something that you want to climb and it not really be in the condition that you can climb it in, but they can climb it because they're really good climbers. People are a bit misleading sometimes about the information they share on social media. Definitely happens in Scotland in the winter. People will write, oh, I climbed this yesterday, and actually it's in really tricky condition. So just making sure that when you do get information, you're getting it from valid places like a guide's office, or if you know people who live out there who you trust, then trying to get in contact with them. But I think if you don't have knowledge of people who are there on the ground, then the best place to go in the Alps is to go to the guide's office and actually speak to people, ask them, tell them what sort of thing you'd like to do, and then they might be able to come back with some suggestions.
Yeah, great. Someone's just popped up asking, is there an equivalent of a guide's office in Scotland? Where would you get good information in Scottish climbing?
There isn't an equivalent of a guide's office in Scotland. You can get a lot of information off the Scottish Avalanche Information Service website, and they run blogs. So you can quite often see what conditions look like there. And then just perhaps looking at websites that are going to have more reliable stuff. So if you might be able to see what they've been up to at Glenmore Lodge, or you might be able to see what people have been up to at Plassabrennan through social media, following their social media. And then other people who are guides and instructors.
Yeah, so it's that reliable information, isn't it? It's the key, yeah, and not relying on Al Leary to tell you what. That's fantastic. We've got a question from Emma Williams. He wants to know: is your time split equally between the UK and the Alps for work, or do you mainly focus on big trips?
No, I don't work in the Alps at all. I work in North Wales most of the time, and then I work in Scotland for some of the winter. And I just try to get out to the Alps when I can. So it might just be one trip a year, whereas in the past, when I was a bit more free and I was a sort of working shorter term contracts as a mountaineering instructor, then I had more time to just head out there more often.
Yeah. We've got a comment on Facebook, just picking up on the Colville course stuff that you were talking about briefly at the end, wanting to know examples of scholarships at Alpinism, what the age limit. I guess the best thing would be to do, Alina, is to look up the Colville course, and they do some really, I think it's 30, is that right, Kath?
I'm not sure actually. I think it might like 28 or 30. I'm not 100% sure.
28. I think
28.
I think it's 28.
Yeah.
If you go to the Colville Memorial Trust website, you'll be able to get information. They do some Scottish ones as well.
Yeah.
And then Plassabrennan do a funded Scottish winter mountaineering course as well. So it's worth looking that up on their website. Closer to the winter, I would have thought. It possibly won't be there at the moment.
Yeah, I think that there's lots of we've been talking a bit in the club about different ways of training for the Alps and the skills that you need in the Alps in the UK, and especially at the moment when we don't really know what's going on with international travel, and we kind of have quite a lot of like the same skills that you can use on the UK mountains. So thinking about rope scrambling and things like that, where would you recommend people go to practice those kind of skills, and how would you develop those kind of rope scrambling skills?
I think that North Wales is the perfect place, because there's lots of really accessible scrambles, and you can start sort of thinking about learning to move together and that sort of thing, and lots of the scrambles are well travelled, so you're not ending up on sort of weird stuff if you stick to starred routes, and you can start linking things together. So you can, in Ogwen, there's lots of things that you can link up together, from starting at the side of the slabs and going up the Cnyde and Arret, and then going over onto Glydavac, linking things off the east face of Tryfan or on the west face of Tryfan. and they're all really accessible and good quality. I guess the other place to go would be to go to Skye, where you just, there's lots of really cool scrambling to do, things like Pinnacle Ridge and the actual whole of the Coolin Ridge, and various other scrambles that are there that you can link up to get good full days of scrambling in. Yeah, so there would be my 2 places to go really to train.
Great, thanks. And I mean, and if those skills of rope scrambling are a bit above you at the moment, if you wanted to hire a mountaineering climbing instructor, then they can always show you the ropes as it was. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, which I know I struggle with a little bit myself, is on the busy routes. And you said in the couloir on the Eiger, there's lots of kind of shoulder barging and that kind of thing. I personally find that really difficult to deal with. I think it's because we're far too British and go, after you, oh no, you look much better and faster than me, so you must go first because you're French, and then kind of been like, oh god, should have just gone first. How can you give me any advice on, except from just kind of deal with it?
Yeah, I remember being really shocked on the Cosmics Arete on that first trip. I was like climbing up this section and this French guy just like just went, no, you put your foot here, and he just moved my foot and put my foot on this different hold to where it was. And I remember just thinking, this is weird. But that doesn't happen in that many areas. So it does happen in Chamonix. So I guess the thing is to not choose those honeypot routes and perhaps go to quieter areas. Like the places in Switzerland, like a Roller, for example, have got loads of really good quality easier routes, but you've got to walk to them. So Chamonix is popular because it's mostly lift access, whereas a Roller, there's no lift access, but there's a really lovely campsite there. The walking to get to the huts to do these routes is really lovely, and I think it's a better all-round experience, and you're not going to suffer from the sort of shoulder barging type of thing. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I like exploring other parts of the Alps, because I'm not really that keen on sharing a route with a million other people and ropes getting tangled around each other and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think in one guidebook they talk about Gran Paradiso and kind of trying to avoid the Italian carnage on the top. So I think, you know, with those popular routes, but yeah, I mean, because I've been over to the Bernina and around there, those kind of more eastern areas, and it's just so quiet, and it's yeah, I find that it's a really great area to make mistakes without too many people watching you, and as well. So I think that's it for questions for now. What we've done, like in other weeks, if anyone thinks of questions later on, you can send them in to us and we can always ask Kath. And also this video will be up on our website, so all of our past talks, the videos are up on our website with a little blog and some more questions that our speakers have very kindly answered as well. So I just want to say thank you so much, Kath, for joining us this evening, and sorry about all the technical issues before. But it's been amazing having you, and I think you've really inspired a lot of people and giving them lots of ideas as well. So we're really grateful for your time and preparing for this as well.
Thanks for having me, Jenny. It's been great.
Thank you. So just telling you what's coming up next. So we've got some more talks planned. So next week we've got another Plaza Brennan instructor, Helen Teasdale, who's going to come and talk to us about taking your family on Alpine adventures, and she's going to be sharing how she's taken her son from a very young age into the Alps. So that one's going to be great. The week after, we've got Katie Keeley, who's one of our very brave members who stepped up to do a talk, and we're going to be leaving the Alps and going to the desert and talking about climbing there. And then the week after, we've got the legend that is Adele Pennington talking to us about a very special Matterhorn ascent with one of her very well, I was going to say old friends, but that always sounds horrible, just a dear friend. So we're really looking forward to those, and yeah, we hope everyone's well. Hopefully in Wales we'll be able to get out of it more soon, but just want to say, you know, keep safe everyone, and over to the birthday girl, Lizzie, who's dressed up for the occasion.
Hello, it wouldn't be like WAAC if it wasn't my birthday. We had birthday celebrations for me last year at our summer meet, which was amazing. So getting a little bit of that synchronicity this year again with this Alpine Stories falling on my birthday. But again, thank you so much to Kath for joining us and sharing so many great stories and top tips and things with us. We hope that you, again, are, as Jenny said, are all safe and happy, your families and friends as well. If you want to join us for more, make sure that you're following us on the Facebook page, and if you're one of our lady members, then you can join on our private Facebook group. Certainly go onto our website, all of our details are here. Follow us on Instagram as well, and sign up for our newsletter so that you can stay up to date. The other really important bit of information that we want to share with you is Kath's contact details. So if you are interested in employing her as a guide, or have more questions that you want to ask her directly, or interested in any of the courses at Plasty Brennan, then, you know, go ahead and use the contact details that she shared here and get in touch with her directly. And just to end everything, thank you guys so much. Thanks for joining us today. We hope everybody is well. We hope that everybody who's able to get out to climb has been able to socially distance and safely get out back on the rock again. And for those of you who are not there yet, it's coming soon, and we're looking forward to seeing you for adventures soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Bye.